meeting. So
okay, so we're recording. I think the interest and urgency of finding a time, especially that Joey could join us this week, was so that we could discuss a path, a work plan to develop a more detailed plan for public engagement around ACC2 and ACT. So really appreciate Rachel Stevens joining us today. For folks who don't know Rachel, she's the new-ish Air Quality and Climate Division attorney for DEC. So she's Megan's position, and Rachel is also supporting the work of the Climate Office as we move into advancing the development of that. So Rachel's legal counsel for all the critical climate work within the Agency of Natural Resources. And she's been working really closely with Megan on the preparation for rulemaking, filing of the rules, and will help support us also with respect to interpretation of what we need to do for public engagement, as well as I think actually helping us with some of the public engagement. So Megan and Rachel are both here today and can help facilitate the conversation and some background to remind us and ground us in what is the expectation or somewhat interpretation of what we have to do for public engagement around these rules. And then it'd be great to sort of think through the role with you, Chris, of RPCs and the Just Transitions Committee, and come up with some action items of how we'll formalize the plan and how we could engage and capitalize on capacity through both RPCs and DNRC and others. And so that's our main goal for today. There's a lot of other sort of emails and updates and other things happening in the transportation space that if we have time at the end, we can just sort of do a round robin around both the technical analysis specifically and then some of the other moving pieces. And then I was a little, I'll just say really briefly before everybody goes, I was a little disheartened that I was 2 minutes late today and you were not already meeting, because I thought I changed my Zoom setting so that you would all join without a host. That's important since I'm not going to be here for 2 weeks starting next week. So I will continue to work on that. And if not, I might need to coordinate with Joey and maybe switch out the Zoom link or something for the 2 meetings so that you all aren't shut out while I'm away. So just sort of a stay tuned so I can make sure you guys can keep up the good work while I'm not around. So is that okay to turn over to you, Megan and Rachel, to sort of just give some background on the rulemaking, and hopefully I categorized what we want to get out of this today?
Yeah, I think that's great, Jane. And I think, yeah, we really need to start figuring out dates and especially, locations and format for what these hearings are going to look like. And I think starting with this group and then also, sharing our initial thoughts with maybe some of the other subcommittees to make sure that we're kind of on the right track, especially in terms of the provision of the Global Warming Solutions Act that requires us to, host these hearings in communities that, we identify as being disproportionately impacted by climate change. So, but anyways, just to kind of recap where we are, we sent the draft rulemaking package to the council in May. We sent it to the legislative committees of jurisdiction that are identified in the GWSA on June 1st. We've not received any questions or feedback about the materials that we've provided so far. So I guess no news is good news. And we're working to finalize our rulemaking record right now. We just received the modeling results for the ACC2 emissions reductions analysis that NESCOM was working on with some of their subcontractors. We just received that on June 1st, and Colin's been working hard to make sure that that all makes sense and to integrate that analysis into our, not only to be able to explain what the emissions reductions are in the rule, but also to update that transportation gap analysis that we did previously. So we plan to file the rule with ICAR on June 27th. So by the time you get back from vacation, Jane, everything will be done. And then we'll, after we meet with ICAR on July 11th, we will file the rule with the Secretary of State's office as a proposed rule. And then as soon as the Secretary of State posts the rule, the proposed rule notice online, we will then have a 30-day kind of waiting period. And after that 30-day waiting period, we'll be able to start engaging with the public in hearings. So the first day that we can start doing our public hearing is, I think it's August 18th, assuming that we file the rule the week of July 11th. August 19th. But I think, Jane, you've acknowledged a couple of times that it might make sense, or it makes sense to wait until early September after kids are back in school and kind of summer vacation plans have wrapped up to begin the public hearing process. And so right now in our timeline, we have 4 weeks in pretty much the 4 weeks in September blocked out to do a kind of rulemaking hearing roadshow. So the weeks of September 5th through September 26th, I think, is what we're looking at. The Global Warming Solutions Act doesn't specify the number of hearings that we have to have. So I think that's something that we need to decide is, and maybe that will be based on, I think, the number of communities that, or the communities that we identify that we feel are appropriate and meet the requirements of the law to hold hearings.
And I put that language in the chat for folks that want to.
Thanks, Rachel. So, yeah, I think I just want to open it up and see if there, like I said, the language in the act is pretty vague. It doesn't specify a number, it doesn't specify locations. It just says that they have to kind of meet this criteria that Rachel put in the chat. So happy to hear thoughts, and also specifically interested in hearing from you, Chris, on potential for coordination or your thoughts on potentially coordinating with RPCs. I'm thinking about when we were doing our public engagement process related to TCIP several years ago, pre-COVID, we partnered really effectively with the RPCs to visit various places around the state to provide a presentation about TCIP and answer questions from the public. And I felt like those were all really well attended, and they worked really well. And so I feel like that's a really great example of that kind of coordination, and would certainly be interested in trying to do that again here. So I'll open it up. Unless Rachel, if I missed anything, please jump in.
No, I think I'll just share that, the agency is looking at, in other contexts, how we would interpret disadvantaged, low income and rural communities given the EJ law. But I think we would just be really interested to hear feedback from others as we, think about how we would interpret it in this context. So thanks.
Jane?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to put a few sidebars on as we start to think about this. So first off, we have the Just Transitions Subcommittee, and we have a definition for that work based on frontline and impacted communities. And so certainly would want to consider that as we're thinking about how to do this and who we're thinking about in this space. Second, we have a public engagement task group, and that's very much a subgroup of the Just Transitions, with a few additions in that space, like Joey joins us on occasion and others. But I will say that what worries me about this requirement, and this is what I'll just sort of put out there, and I think we should think about how to engage with Just Transitions in that task group specifically, is that we've essentially said in those spaces that we don't know that the way to reach these communities is through long-term community liaisons, that we can't do hearings and expect in any traditional sense that we're going to reach these communities, right? And actually feel like we've done our job. So I feel like there's this like split here that's asking us to do something kind of traditional, hearings, and asking us then to reach communities in a way that we've never been able to through those traditional outreach methods. And so, like in the space of the res, which we're now coordinating with PSD on, we're trying to like build that case that in order to reach a broader suite of communities and people in Vermont, that we need 18 months to do that work. And in order to first lay the groundwork of relationship building before we can even talk about a specific policy or interest. And so I worry about that. And then two, so the one sidebar is just like how we're going to interact with Just Transitions and the public engagement task group in this space, because that is really sort of their component of this work. And then second, I just want to put on why I think it's so important to think about the capacity that VNRC or VCAN and RPCs bring, is that we don't have any specific resources sort of set out right now to help do this work. And so just want to highlight that we don't have any extra funding sitting around for facilitation or work. And so that also worries me a little bit.
Gina?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jane, that we have two things going on here. One is we need to create relationships and dialogue with these communities. And the other thing is we got to check a box that we've held these hearings in order to get this rule through. I mean, really. So I don't think you can, and you just articulated, Jane, how you combine the two. I can't see that happening in like the next 2 months. This language here, it's interesting to me because those, right now we know those who are and Chris can confirm this, those who are impacted by climate change or in flood prone areas, living in perhaps in mobile home parks. Those are the areas that have been hit so far. We don't know what's coming. We do know sort of what's coming in the future, but no, based on past experience. Those aren't necessarily the people who are transportation disadvantaged, or there's just a certain sector of people who we know are affected by climate change and may or may not have a relationship with this rule. So it's hard for me to understand, how we check the box that says, and achieve what we want to out of this rulemaking, out of this public process, and getting good public feedback if we just stick to people who we know have been disadvantaged by climate change in the past. And we can surmise in the future. I would argue the whole state is affected by climate change. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. So think about the two processes separately, the outreach versus the rulemaking, and then try to make the rulemaking as best we can, reaching out to those who are transportation disadvantaged.
Well, can I just ask Megan to clarify? I mean, it feels a little bit, the public engagement is important, period, but like the narrow opportunity, I think we need to really be clear for the public what they have agency over in the conversation, because the rule is the rule, right? So I just want, maybe you can contextualize that for all of us so that we can be thinking about where do people have influence over this conversation? Because this conversation is a concrete rule that we adopt in whole cloth, and it's different from influencing the climate action plan or other components of the climate action plan that have the ability for impacted communities and others to influence in a bigger way than this opportunity provides. Because I just want to be very clear if we're asking people to come and engage and weigh in where they have agency, because we don't, we're adopting that rule. So if you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Joey. And I think that is very different from like how the type of feedback that we typically ask the public for in rulemaking. As you stated, we don't have any flexibility to amend the substantive provisions of the rule or the stringency of the rule. So I think that this is more of a, I feel like it's kind of like a follow-up to the public engagement that happened around the drafting of the climate action plan itself and the process that the council was going through and doing that and deciding to, direct ANR to adopt these rules. And it's kind of a follow-up as saying, this is what the Climate Council decided, and this is the outcome of that. And, these are the impacts that the rule that we project the rule to have on Vermonters. So it is more of an informational opportunity, I feel like, and not necessarily a opportunity for feedback or influence. So we can try to be really clear about that. I mean, we've certainly made that clear in the messaging that we've given to the council and to the legislative committees to date. But yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. And so I think the question is, do we, and this is what we've talked about all along, do we use these opportunities to say, okay, here's the next step in the rulemaking process. This is what we're doing. This is what the council directed us to do. And this is the impact that we projected to have. And then also open up the conversation for, broader discussion and public influence over other transportation related decision-making.
Yeah.
So.
Because this is narrowly, this is a rule that will apply to manufacturers.
Yes.
Right.
And ideally be an opportunity for Vermonters. So I think I just want to clarify that for everyone so that we are clear about what this component is so that we can be very intentional about if we want an additive layer of framing it more broadly. And this will get us so far. And then we need to fill this gap in a big other way. And that's the bigger opportunity for public influence.
Yeah.
Just real quick, where I'm not finding it in my email. Where is the draft rule?
I'll put the link in the,
what's that?
I'm going to put the link in the chat, Chris. Hold on one second.
Again, maybe one thing you and I can, to Joey's point, one thing that we could think about is, so Megan and I have been learning a lot more about, there is a way that manufacturers can get values or kind of similar to credits for environmental justice related work. And the qualifying projects are kind of left to define by the agency. So, we would have some ability in the future to set guidance for how these specific values could be generated in Vermont. Now, again, that's not really influencing the rule, but there may be, we could try to think about framing some specific aspects of the rulemaking that might, be more ripe for public comment than others, though, again, it doesn't necessarily change the rule itself, but it is a way to have a conversation about environmental justice impacts in a way that we may have some flexibility in how we implement that in Vermont. But that's, we haven't really dug into that, or, Megan and I are digging into it now to try to make sure we understand the scope of what we could do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Rachel, and something that we could really highlight as something that is unique or will be built in a unique way relative to Vermont. So that's a great idea, and we should definitely use this opportunity to highlight that. Chris?
I think part of what might be helpful is, you're right in that once you've got a proposed rule out there and by law, we're already destined to adopt it, and since it's tied to another state laws, so yeah, explain to the public what the limitations are. But maybe what we could do is as public meetings or outreach is frankly describe what does this mean to sectors in Vermont, to people in Vermont. And hopefully there are some advocates, or maybe people opposed to it too, but people, if there are technologies that have already been adopted, if there are people who've already begun to live what this rule would mandate, throughout the state, have people talk about, what it means, and just kind of pull that out of the kind of dry rulemaking stuff, and just try to explain to people this is what we're trying. I can't remember if it made it to the Just Transitions process or not, but part of it was just trying to explain in plain English, what the actual effects are going to be.
Yeah, and
And
we,
that may be something where and just real quick on the RPCs, Andrea, I don't know if you've gotten up to speed with TPI and how the transportation planners work and that whole structure, but like they were looking for topics for next week. I don't know if there's still topics or not, but this could be something that that could be discussed just to kind of give folk a heads up. But part of what we'll need to do, I think that there would be no problem with RPCs hosting either, whether it's clusters of RPCs or each individual RPC, kind of doing what we did around TCI. But the first step is going to be educating the transportation planners about what all's in this. And so that will mean, like, whether it's a TCI meeting or another, by TPI meeting, what I mean by that is the transportation planners get together once a month, except for August. And usually for half a day. So we're now going back to some in-person meetings. So those are more of the old-fashioned in-person full-day meetings at the building out by the airport in Barry or Berlin. But we'll need to get the RPC planners trained up. I don't think that's going to be a particularly heavy lift. And it could either be at a TPI meeting or as a separate, meeting around it. But I think that's not going to be an issue to do that. But Andrea, you might want to be the liaison from this group, the VTrans, because VTrans kind of has to be on board with this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. But I also wonder, in the broader picture of things, if the RPCs are going to be asked to help with other outreach from the Climate Council. I'm not sure if the TPI is the right place to do that, but is there another avenue or?
TPI is not the outreach, it's where you get the planners up to speed. It's where
No, I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, but they may need to be brought up to speed on other things that aren't related to transportation that they may be asked to help support the Climate Council and public engagement, right? So that's just, I'm wondering if it's, you don't think so?
Right, but for transportation, we actually have funding to do that through the TPI. For the other work, that's going to be a matter of bringing it to the RPC directors through VAPDA and saying, what capacity do you have to do this work? Because our broader capacity that we had last year now has shrunk down to municipal building assistance. So the legislature doesn't seem to grasp that we can do what they fund us to do, and the very narrow scopes of work aren't helpful. But yes, I'm not saying we can certainly do it, but that's another conversation as far as once we get beyond transportation.
Yeah.
But within the transportation realm, it's actually part of the contract we have with the state. But it's all, the language is also such that we kind of have to have direction from VTrans, which is not a problem. I'm just saying we need to let Amy Bell know, hey, we need time on TPI to talk about this. And we need to think about, how much time and effort it's going to take and what the timeline is relative to other TPI tasks. So I'm happy to guide all that. I will note that I'm going to be transitioning out of being the VAPDA Transportation Committee chair. I'm moving over to emergency management. I've done transportation for 12 years, and Jason Rasmussen is the new director at Mount Scottney Regional Commission and was their transportation planner. So thought it made a lot more sense for him to, being new, kind of come in on the transportation side. Catherine Demetric, who had been chairing our emergency management committee, is now going to be chair of VAPDA, so I'm going to slide over to emergency management. But I can still help with the transportation stuff.
I mean, just to wrap this up, the TPI planners are a potential resource for community outreach. They're transportation experts in each of the regional planning commissions. They should be fully informed of the CAP and these various initiatives because they're the ones who are going to help convey the messages at the local level. So they're an incredibly valuable tool. And we went through the same thing with stormwater 6-7 years ago, where we got them really up to speed and got the technical expertise that was necessary to implement all the new roadway requirements around stormwater. I see a very similar thing going on here, where they will get expertise on all of our initiatives, all the stuff we're working on right now, and can help translate that down to the local level.
So we're happy to help.
So,
There's lots of good stuff that we can do. So just need to figure out what the tasks are, and just loop me in, and I'll help you figure out how we can move forward on it.
So I guess two things. One, I would say we don't have any other plans within our public engagement strategy to capitalize on RPCs and the capacity they could provide in this space. And so if it feels appropriate to consider moving forward with the development of a work plan in this space for these hearings to coordinate with RPCs, I think that would be great. And two, my suggestion here would be to flesh out what we expect or think we are capable of doing with respect to this requirement in the GWSA and around these hearings, and then sort of test that with Just Transitions or the Public Engagement Task Group to see if they support the approach and understand the rationale, and use that sort of as the backbone to sort of to have their support in this space. But I also don't think we should go to them without a formulated plan. They're better to respond to something as a group and influence it. Do you agree with that, Chris? Like, if we were to just go with an open-ended ask of them, it would feel, but I think they could influence it and help hopefully support it for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, because they're not necessarily the subject matter experts, so they need something. They need some form to respond to. Yeah.
Jane, I'm wondering if that's something that would make sense for like Megan and I to maybe take a first draft at, and then work with you and maybe this group to get feedback on, and then send over. I'm also thinking I'm drafting a public engagement plan for the agency for the the language access work that we're doing, and so that could be a model. I know the engagement is going to be different, but in terms of process, that could be getting something down on paper. That could be a model we could maybe use. So, but open to however you all think.
I actually think there's probably a lot we could learn from the public engagement plan that you're putting together for the language access plan.
Well, I'm learning a lot about that too, in terms of, but I think this, I could craft a similar outline to what we're doing there, and then we could adjust it for our needs and see if it's, transferable.
That sounds excellent, Rachel. And it does feel like, just as you think about drafting that, you and Megan, I would encourage you to think about if there is a role for RPCs in helping host the events is one opportunity. And while I did allude to not having specific resources for this, we do have a robust RFP that who knows if it'll be actually contracted by then, but we have a new RFP that we're putting out for that. CBI's contract is wrapping up. And so it should be probably spent out in the next few weeks. And we're going to have this sort of lag where we have no facilitation or support help for the council and engagement. But we have an RFP drafted that speaks to tries to sort of incorporate elements of what was our facilitation contract for the council, and then what was sort of some components of the public engagement contract that we had with Climate Access. So it builds in both like support for facilitation, public meetings. It also has money in it to pay for partner support and to help people be supported to come to meetings. So I should probably sort of share that contract so we have some limited capacity in that space to help with facilitation if we need it for these meetings, And two, if there's any role in supporting people coming to the meetings, we'll have funding in that contract to pay people. It's just an issue of, a lot of interest and wants in the space of public engagement and trying to figure out where best to use our limited resources.
Can I ask a
But
question?
that seems like a great.
Jane, yeah, I'd be glad to do that. And we just had a meeting on that plan earlier in the week, so I have an updated version. We can work internally on that. I did have another question, I guess, Jane, and maybe for you too, Megan, in the group, about whether there were any other any other goals for the meeting besides just feedback on the rule, given Joey, your comment that there's not, much that folks can comment on if we wanted to use the space to talk about anything else or to introduce anything else, or if that would be confusing. I don't know if Jane, if your team has discussed it or if folks have thoughts on that.
We've discussed it, Megan and others, and I will say Julie's a little apprehensive about doing too much in the same space as a rule making. So, however, I do think it's a very worthwhile exercise to envision how we also speak to the ongoing work in the transportation space, because if we're putting all this effort into doing engagement around a rule that no one can change or influence, I think but we're clearly reaching people who are interested in transportation issues, that it would be a missed opportunity to not also use it as a space to say, this is how this is going to impact opportunities for EV sales in Vermont. And while you can't change this, or it's not based on the consumer, it's based at the manufacturer level, we are working to meet emissions reduction goals broader, and this is how. And so maybe that's a specific, like if you're thinking about the public engagement plan, maybe at the same time, sort of the key points of how we want to frame these hearings would be another to do that we could bring back to this group, and then also think about internally with Julie what she's comfortable with.
Yeah, it was just through that other process I'm learning, we kind of keep having to come back to what are the goals, because if you want to know like who should be there, how do we organize the time? It's also like, okay, what's the goal? What are we, are we getting feedback on this, or are we sharing information? So that's where those questions are coming from, because I think it is linked to how we plan and design the kind of the engagement. But
I guess I just want to provide, legally, these hearings are, in accordance with the Administrative Procedure Act. I mean, if this language that Rachel had shared regarding public engagement in GWSA didn't exist, we wouldn't even have to have a hearing unless a member of the public specifically requested it. And even when we do have these rulemaking hearings, I mean, legally, what we're required to do, baseline, is show up and see if any members of the public want to make a verbal comment, and then we go home, and that's it. So that's like the, that's the baseline. We never do that. ANR is usually much more engaged and, inclined to share information at these hearings. And I think that this is going to be an opportunity for information sharing, because there's a lot that we've learned in the last several months about what these rules are going to mean in terms of not only impact to the emissions picture in the transportation sector, but we've also, and this is kind of to answer one of your earlier questions, Chris, about like, who is this rule going to impact and how can we articulate that? We have addressed impacts to, different categories of individuals and entities in our rulemaking record that accompanies the rule. And so I think this would be an opportunity to share that information via the hearing with the public to kind of what to expect as an individual, how this is going to impact you, what to expect if you own a fleet of vehicles associated with your business operations, how is that going to impact you? And so I think we'd be prepared to share not only the emission side and how we expect this to mitigate climate change from reducing emissions, but also how it's going to impact individuals and entities. And so I think it will be primarily an information sharing opportunity. I think, Rachel, your idea of bringing the specific EJ credit flexibilities to the front of the public's mind in terms of understanding that that is going to be an opportunity where the public can actually provide feedback on what programs auto manufacturers should be eligible, or should be allowed to earn these credits. And so I think that's primarily what we can do. And I think that's all really good information. It's just, as Joey pointed out, it's not an opportunity for feedback. It's more an opportunity for us to provide what we've learned about the rule.
I think you've made some excellent points, but who's the target audience for this? Because who are we trying to get there? Are we trying to get the public in disadvantaged communities? Are we trying to get car dealers? Are we trying to get enthusiastic environmentalists? So then you tailor the presentation to that group to so they understand what you're talking about, and you can get feedback if possible. And the other thing you got to remember is you got to take off your lawyer hat, you got to take off your bureaucrat hat, you got to take off your scientist hat, you got to talk in a way that people, like at Thanksgiving, your uncle can understand what is going on. And that's so hard to do, but that's tailored to whoever the heck is sitting in the chair. And we'll have some control because we're going to market this to that group that we want there. So who do we want there? Or maybe we don't know.
Well, I mean, usually when we do a public rulemaking process, I think our primary audience is the regulated community and the people that are going to be impacted by those regulations. I don't know if any auto manufacturers will show up to our rulemaking hearings. They might. I'm not sure. But I think, just setting that group aside, I think our primary audience are the people in Vermont that are going to be impacted by the fact that this rule is hopefully going to mitigate emissions, and also, provide, what we describe in our record as a broader availability of this technology and cost savings associated with this technology. So those are the two, I think, other categories of people that we're going to be speaking to, absent the auto manufacturers themselves.
So do you want the general public, or will you go to work towards the usual folks who show up at these things? Because if you take the usual steps to notice, you will get the usual people who show up at these things, which is valuable. You just won't get, my neighbor who's
I think we're required to go above and beyond our usual steps here, Gina. I think that's pretty clear in the GWSA. So I don't think we're going to be, purposely hiding this opportunity from anyone. So
then you got to figure out how you do that, and it's not. And Joey can tell you it's not for the faint of heart trying to get those people. You all can get those people to come out. And I don't know that we have time, and they don't have the level of information. And it gets back to what we were talking about before, which is we got to do all this just transitions, information, education that's going to take months and months to develop, versus we've got to get this rulemaking done quickly. And it's pretty narrow in its scope. And it's pretty complicated.
Joey? You're on mute. I think you hit it twice there.
Sorry. Just a couple different thoughts. From the first rulemaking on advanced clean cars, I'm sure there's a list of parties who participated. I mean, unless I'm wrong, we don't have any auto manufacturers in the state of Vermont.
We don't, but they can still show up. I mean,
I understand.
They have lobbyists.
Yeah. But I'm sure we have folks that work along the supply chain. So I'm assuming we're gonna reach out to everyone who participated in the past, and we'll do the traditional outreach, and we can do more targeted outreach. I think it's great. And thank you, Rachel and Megan, to the putting sort of like words on paper to float it by public engagement and just transitions team. I think that makes sense. I also think that, people are going to show up because they're following this process. And I think people are going to show up with like top of mind, the price at the pump. Like, this is just like what people are thinking about, which I think provides, as I think Megan and several of you were sort of articulating, an opportunity for the general education of like electric vehicles and like, what is the market and what could that market be like? And what is like the cost and the owner, like, I mean, just like the basics of what will these two programs mean for Vermonters, and what is the opportunity through the lens of like, what are people dealing with in this moment, and how does this potential rule serve to change that dynamic? So I
Yeah.
think that that's going to be an important place to start. And I would, once you have those words on the page, love to work with you all on, yes, I get that this is a rulemaking for advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, like, but people are going to come with a broader frame. And because the language in the Global Warming Solutions Act is so vague, I think we can check off that box. And I think we need to invite a broader conversation about transportation. And I said I have very different thoughts, and I very much think that the environmental justice piece is a concrete piece that I'd love us to hone in too. So Rachel, if you're taking that lead, and Megan, I appreciate that and would love to sort of flesh that out a little bit more. With you
Yeah,
all.
and we met with some, I think, you know, we have some information in the draft rules and the summary that's on the website, but since then, California has been hosting several like information sessions for states about that topic specifically. So there has been more information that we've garnered even in, you know, as they're developing their rulemaking, that will definitely be in our updated package.
And Rachel, that's the kind of thing where, if you're aware of it, like if maybe we can just like, Andrea, even get this on like transportation planning and the TPI monthly meeting. If we can get like an introduction to what this rule is, I'm talking like a 15-minute introduction or something. Then Rachel, like as California does those things, then we can, if you can just get us into the loop, then we can pass that along to the transportation planners, and like they can start getting up to speed that way. You know, through through webinars and all that are happening elsewhere. Because the more we know, and the more we can see also how they've become conversant about it there, it'll help us become more conversant about it here and have better field questions. So don't hesitate if you're willing to kind of share. I mean, obviously something for environmental lawyers, it wouldn't necessarily be much help, but if they're having webinars about other aspects about the rulemaking, that would be that'd be great. So yeah,
I think there's been lots of different forums. I think the one that Megan and I attended was directed towards states that were implementing the advanced clean cars too, to kind of answer questions about each. But I think that makes sense, you know, because there are a lot of public meetings and information sessions that are going to be happening through California too. So yeah, Megan and I we can talk about that and how we can, yeah.
So I think where we
What
land, oh, sorry, Jane.
I was just going to ask you about if you could speak to what would be a helpful timeline to bring this back to this group with like a draft plan for public engagement and then a draft components of talking points.
Yeah, when is this group scheduled to meet next? Are we meeting on Monday?
Every Monday.
Okay. So I'm wondering, well, I guess, Rachel, what are you thinking in terms of timing? Like, do you think that we could put a rough outline of something together by Monday to run by this group?
Yeah, what I'm thinking though, I just want to run it by Carla because it's a draft in our LAP context. So I just want to, you know, but I think what I would do is take that format and outline and then, you know, adjust it for what our needs would be. So, I mean, I could do that relatively quickly, but I would want to run it by Carla internally and then you both. So Monday might be doable. I mean, in terms of like, we have the content, it would just be making sure everyone who I would want to check with is available today and tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Yeah, well, we can connect on that. I mean, we could try to have something for Monday for this group's meeting, and if not, well, then we won't, and we can shoot for the following week.
I also think at the same time, you need to figure out who's hosting these meetings and who are you trying to get there? Because there's all the information you're going to present, but then are we gonna go with the RPCs hosting meetings? Are you gonna do, I guess there's no budget to do anything else, right?
Well,
Or are you just
I
gonna
have this
pick
whole
5
thing of,
locations
like, are we
around?
doing them in
What's
or
the
online?
strategy?
Are you gonna put that kind of level of detail, I would imagine, in the
Yeah, I
proposal
mean,
for what?
Oh, you will. Okay, okay. I thought you were just doing the content. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're getting into we're really getting into it for another planning process that we're developing. So like one virtual meeting, are we going to have an informational video? Are we going to do, an FAQ document? Are we going to, we've gotten really into the weeds in another process. So again, I'm not sure how much would translate, but I could, we could adapt it and then play around with it.
Yeah, we can articulate all of that.
Rachel, just for perspective, for that outreach process around the, is there a budget, and do you know what that is? Because that would be helpful.
Mm.
in
For
planning.
language access, no, but I think it's being discussed. So,
Okay.
yeah, but the tricky bit is we're not on an external timeline for the language access plan. So, we're working on it over months, and would probably delay if we felt like we needed to wait for a budget, whereas this is going to be much more accelerated. So that's just a consideration, but I can find out, Jane, and we can talk internally about that.
And just
I will say
knowing that
translation, if that is something that is a part of this at all, as you know, does require cost. So that at a minimum, and that's one cost.
and we do have a budget within, I'll just say, set aside in the climate office specifically for translation services, because we have been starting to do that as part of our engagement and outreach. And I do have a pot of money in our budget specific for that if we choose to move. So, I mean, we have some money in our budget for components of engagement that are disparate, not all put together, but I will say that, remember what I was going to say. Oh, I was going to say just knowing that Julie's expressed interest in this engagement in the past with me. I check my general check-in with her tomorrow, and I will add this to my list about like how to engage her in this process around the larger format of these meetings.
Are you going to have different strategies for different contexts? So if you go up to Island Pond, what are you going to say versus if you're in Montpelier, what are you going to say? Because the audiences are going to be very different. Are you going to work to get different audiences? Or are you just going to do one thing? That's just something you need to sort of reckon with. Is this one consistent presentation with the same audience? That's your goal versus we want to hear from a rural person just as much as we do the lobbyists or the auto manufacturers. It's okay. I think you just need to recognize who it is you're trying to talk to here and then present as needed.
Well, I'll just mention, Jane did put it in the chat earlier on. I think that, the agency is working on a broader community engagement planning process that involves a lot of these types of conversations about, how we do outreach, and we're working directly with, community liaisons and developing that process. So that is happening. But while that process is unfolding in a broader way, there's also these kind of, discrete decision-making processes that we're also trying to implement. So I'll just share that we appreciate that. And I think we're very aware of the varied needs and are actively working on community engagement practices broadly, but also as we roll out specific decisions kind of in that meantime.
Okay. So this isn't necessarily in sync with that effort.
I mean, that's been going on for a while, and is, we have contractors and we're working actively on like developing that for DEC, but I think it's going to definitely be informed. I mean, obviously we can inform this process through that work, but we're really trying to make sure that we're at a minimum, as Megan said, implementing our baseline requirements, and then also, considering, you know,
Right.
what else is feasible and makes sense for the communities. So.
Thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like either for next Monday or perhaps I kind of feel like the 20th is a better goal, just a more realistic goal, and that would allow internal conversation with the secretary as well as if we want to have a interim step of talking with Just Transitions, they're actually meeting next week. So maybe we can just sort of internally vet a realistic timeline for developing a plan and who the touch points are, and then coming back to this task group, hopefully by the 20th to vet that. Yeah, and then move
Could
forward
we
from there.
talk about it if you get a little bit more clarity? I don't know if like next Monday, so that we can put something forward into those other conversations for the 20th. It feels like, I mean, we sort of sketched some of it out just now. I don't know. I don't want to put too much on your plate, but I don't want it to linger too long either. Or maybe we can do it jointly. Because I'm also looking.
I just want a bit about like order of transaction and review to make it most productive. Like I guess I just feel almost like there should be some internal vetting within our agency around capacity and expectations around what the agency can do before we give you a plan and then pull back on it because of that. And so that's my anxiety about, without having that internal vetting about what we can actually do, coming to this task group and then coming back. So that's why I kind of feel like having that week next week, and then coming back on Monday where it's still rough and there's still influence to have with this task group, but being able to have a better expectation of what we can deliver on.
Okay, you're gonna be out, so who will be that liaison between Julie and?
Megan and I will talk.
Okay. Do we, I have to leave in just 1 minute. Do we want to, I guess I would welcome people's input on an agenda for next week if we want to focus on like helping to answer the question on like what other, like everything else component of the public engagement piece and like the substantive, like what is, we know there's a big gap to fill, like, is that the agenda? I just would welcome people's email me with agenda input if you have anything beyond the standing agenda. Next week, it's just our standing meeting, Megan, Mondays.
Yeah, so I mean, just ongoing work. I mean, Andrea can't be at the meeting on Monday, but there is ongoing work in the technical analysis space that at some point would be good to update the whole task group on. And then some of the other stuff I have been thinking about with that I haven't shared with Megan, but in thinking about other public engagement pieces, I can think of some other webinar topics that I think would be productive actually. And so maybe I can find a time with Megan today or tomorrow just to think about order of the, like managing the public engagement planning for ACC2 and ACT, and then thinking about other components for public engagement, and then Megan can lead you all through that if she can be there on Monday. I know Andrea can't be there on Monday, and is Jared, I think Jared is off through Monday, but I'm not, so Jared might not be there either. So, but might be back then, I'm not sure. And then, oh, well, and then on Monday, Amanda's joining you all to talk specifically about that public engagement piece. And then one quick update also in the EAN space is I know I included Joey and Gina. I asked Kara to include Joey and Gina and Jared on that, but I don't think this whole task group was. I had met with Kara and Jared just to talk about the WCI pitch that Linda McGinnis is talking about and how to coordinate with this task group. And they want to come and meet with the task group, which I think is really great, on June 27th. So the focus of that task group meeting will be around how to elevate and coordinate if there's a WCI pitch from EAN, how that would work with the ongoing work of this task group.
Thank you, Jane, for that. I'm not going to be around, so you guys can either move forward or maybe we can find a different date, but I have to run now. But thank you guys, and very much huge thanks to Megan and Rachel for doing what you're doing and for putting a draft concept out there and for the RPC outreach and everything else. So sorry to miss the public comment if there is any. Bye all.
No worries. So it sounds like for Monday, Megan, you and I can touch base, and this sounds like there'll be plenty worthwhile meeting on Monday, especially with Amanda joining that meeting. And then we can sort of sketch out, hopefully the following Monday, you can re-engage with this task group around a proposal for the public engagement for ACC2 and ACT. And then at some
Yeah,
point,
and
Andrea, I feel like pieces with AOT that should be updated here.
I forgot to mention earlier in terms of our timeline, when we file the proposed rule with the Secretary of State, we don't have to have this for ICAR, but when we file the proposed rule by the end of the week of July 11th, we should be able to put in our proposed filing what our rulemaking hearing schedule will be, so that the Secretary of State can include that in their online posting and the posting that they'll do in the newspapers of record. So it would be really great if we could have that schedule and the locations just determined by the week of July 11th. So that would be a month or so from today.
It seems like a very good timeline to have if we're going to actually hold these hearings in September. So it makes sense. Okay, feels like there's plenty of to-dos here in this space. Do we want to cover anything else right now, or just see if I'm not sure if there's any public comment, but if there is, just give space for that. Okay.
Can I make one more request from the group, Jane? One of the
Yeah, of course.
One of the things that I'm working on with Megan is a frequently asked questions document, and it would be great to know if you have questions, because you know, we can put them in an outreach document, or just, you know, as you're working through the rules or summaries, if there's things that don't make sense, it's great to have feedback as we think about and try to anticipate what kinds of questions people have. So yeah, if you have questions in that context, maybe send them to you, Jane, or we can, I'm kind of trying to compile a list of questions people have, so it's good to know what you're thinking about.
I think the biggest question is going to be, how do I have a powerful vehicle that doesn't make a lot of noise? Am I just going to have to yell out the window, roar, 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 or,
I know it's worrisome for bikers.
yes.
Think a lot about how, like, when they come up on you, you're like quiet.
Yeah, there could be, this is a new space for trucks and, heavy duty vehicles, so there could be questions about that.
Okay, I think that sounds great. Okay,
That's
stop
actually
recording.
Does questions or another case, that's another situation where questions that come from the RPC planners might be able to help populate that FAQ,
Yeah.
because they're gonna know enough to ask them and ask some informed questions that other folk are likely to ask, and that we're likely to get asked. So that can help with that.
Rachel, is that FAQ, is that specific to the advanced clean cars and to the rulemaking, or just?
Yeah, anything on the rulemaking. Yeah, that's, and I, as we've gone through the process or like attended other meetings, I've just been taking notes of any question anyone has ever asked me about the rules and trying to like begin to organize it into a like useful tool. And yeah, so yeah, any kind of question people have about the rules themselves would be great. You know, we've definitely gotten questions like, how does this impact an individual, or, you know, what is a fleet, or, you know, all kinds of questions that folks might have as they're reading it or engaging with it.
Rachel, I was just thinking another thing, if you haven't already, that might be good to include in that document is just a brief explanation of the complicated air traffic control that we're going to be doing related to the rulemaking, and the fact that we're like repealing the rule via the wood heater amendments and then making this new chapter 40. It's like just kind of mechanically, organizationally complicated, but people might be wondering, like, what the heck are you doing, ANR? And it might be a good place to explain why we're kind of engaging in this complicated orchestration of DEC rules. So
Yeah, even
Yeah,
the new
they're,
chapter.
those aren't normal people.
yeah, I know, but I feel
think-
like
These are the things
you
that
did
Megan and I
something for
toil
them, but
over.
I wouldn't leave it
yeah, well, I feel like there's going to be at least a couple people that notice that we delete the entire Levin Zev rules. I wonder where they are now.
Those
So,
special people can get their own little thing, and
yeah,
I wouldn't weight down the whole thing with that.
no, but it might be a good place to have that answer packaged up nicely so that we can explain to people that, like, no, we're not repealing the Levin Zev rule. We're just moving it to another location. So.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.